Hello, fifth graders. Welcome to Language Arts for today. Before we get started, you will need, for sure, your copy of Gilgamesh. And then again, I'm going to keep bringing this up. If you are having a tough time with the homework questions, then I would really encourage you to start taking advantage of paper and pencil or notebook and pencil, okay? But whatever strategy, if you've been successful, whatever strategy you've used up to this point, you can keep using that. But get those things together and then come on back. So our objective for today, fifth graders, is going to be interpreting a symbol. One of our questions from homework is really going to come around asking about a symbol that appeared earlier in the book and then trying to interpret it now based on what we know by the end of this chapter. So before we get started, we're going to talk quickly about your homework questions. And then we'll get into today's reading. So, for Marry Me. What is one thing that Gilgamesh would rather do than marry Ishtar? He said two things. He said he would rather play dice with a handful of scorpions, or that he would rather wear tight shoes for the rest of his life than marry Ishtar. What is one quote that hinted that the bull of heaven was approaching Uruk? This was on page 35 at the very bottom. We see red dust trickled from the sandstone buildings, or the dogs began to bark. Cockerels crowed in the middle of the night. Dates fell from the palm trees in fat black splats. Any of those quotes would have been excellent quotes for the approach of the bull of heaven. Pages 39 through 40, I talked about these conflicting moods that are happening. And so one mood really would be grief or sadness. And we see a lot of quotes that support that. 3 and 4 as we're looking at that. So, weep, women, at what they have done, or tears burst through her tightly shut lids, or, and the women did begin weeping for the 300 young men swallowed up by the earth. These would all be great quotes for grief or sadness. And then we also see joy or celebration. And again, lots of quotes could support that as well. Gilgamesh is shouting, Hattie's shouting, the cheering and carrying them on their shoulders. All would have been great quotes to capture those moods. Question 5, why does Gilgamesh believe that his everlasting fame will be ensured? Gilgamesh believes that his everlasting fame will be ensured because he slayed the bull of heaven. Number 6, what does Enkidu's dream foreshadow? We see at the very end, right? He says Enkidu must die. So that is our option for our foreshadowing. And then this word devout, meaning devoted in service. So a servant who refused to follow orders or soldiers that revolt against their general would not be devout. So this second option, the devout friend would not leave his best friend's side, even in danger, would be the correct answer. So for number 5, we're reading death. Again, I keep pointing out that when you are answering short answer questions, you need to use as many words from the question in your answer as possible. I've been returning homework and asking students to correct that, so it's really just a good habit every time to build that in. So for this chapter, number 1 asks, what is a quote on page 42 that shows that Gilgamesh is starting to worry about Enkidu? Number 2, why does Enkidu retract, which means to take back, his curses? 3, on page 44, Gilgamesh says to Enkidu, wake up, I thought you were. Using inference, what was Gilgamesh about to say to Enkidu? Remember, you would say using inference, Gilgamesh was about to say to Enkidu blank. 4, what does Gilgamesh say is happening from birth? 5, Gilgamesh says that he could bear Enkidu's death just as long as what? And 6, on page 26, Gilgamesh dreamed that a bull was charging at Enkidu and that there was nothing he could do to stop it. This happened as they were on their journey to find Huwawa in the cedar forest. Here's where the question starts, so here's where you start restating. By the end of this chapter, what do you think the bull in Gilgamesh's dream is a symbol of? So you would say, by the end of this chapter, I think that the bull in Gilgamesh's dream is a symbol of blank. And here's my hint. That bull is not referring to the bull of heaven. I should say of. So do not say the bull of heaven. It is not referring to the bull of heaven. Okay? We're going to go ahead and get into our Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get into our chapter. So go ahead and make sure you have it out in front of you and ready to go. And remember, of course, that my expectation is that you are following along as I am reading. Your eyes are on the words that I am reading to you, making sure that you are tracking with me and improving your reading as we go. Chapter 5, Death. Actually, when we talked about foreshadowing, I indicated that sometimes chapter titles are examples of foreshadowing, and this would be a great example of that. So, Gilgamesh sponged his friend's face and put a cup of water to his lips. Soon be well, Kidu, soon be well. Enkidu turned his face away. The pain inside his head was like an axe blow. The gods say not. The gods say I must die. But Gilgamesh snorted dismissively. Everyone dreams bad dreams when they're sick. Come on, man. Heroes like us aren't afraid of anything, are we? 2 days later, Enkidu was powerless to sit up, unable to eat. A pulse of fear started up within Gilgamesh despite himself. Soon be well, friend, he kept saying, but Enkidu only groaned. Something worse than misgiving seized on Gilgamesh. I'll go to the temple, Kidu. I'll go and pray for you. The gods will listen to me. Shamash listened before. I'll have the goldsmiths make a statue of you. Yes, I will. I'll tell them to make a golden statue of you and offer it up to the gods in place of the real thing. Why don't I do that? Yes, wait here. Don't worry. You mustn't worry. Everything will be all right. And he was gone, running towards the temple, shouting commands, summoning his craftsmen. Enkidu was left alone on his bed. The sun moved round, and a ray of sunlight like a fist punched through the window and struck him in the face. This is such a great descriptive simile. A lot of times we think of the sun as warm or comforting, and we see in this moment, through this simile, which is comparing two things using like, okay, a ray of sunlight like a fist. So we can imagine that the sunlight is really irritating Enkidu, really irritating and causing his headache to be worse, causing more pain, right? If a sunlight is like a fist punching through the window. Oh, Shamash, you faceless orange clod, hear my curses, he told the sun. Let my curse fall on that trapper who fetched me out of the wild. Make him smell so bad that the beasts sent him 12 leagues off. Let him never catch another creature, not so much as a gerbil. Let him fall into his own pits. Let the lions tear him limb from limb. And Hattie, oh, curse the dancing girl for me. Let all doors shut against her. Give her nowhere to sleep but the rubbish heap. I was happy before she came. Out there in the wilderness, I was happy. But she had to come along and daub me with kisses. She made the animals shun me, so let her be shunned. He broke off, panting for breath. His skull seemed to be squeezing the blood from his brain. The window hanging blew out in a draught and set the sunlight dancing. The beams were full of motes, like stylus marks on a tablet of yellow clay, dancing too excitedly to be read. It seemed to Enkidu that a voice came rustling in at the window along with that breeze, a voice so soft and gentle that he had to strain to hear it. Enkidu, oh Enkidu, why curse? Why curse the trapper? And why curse little Hattie? Without them you would never have gone questing after Hawawa, never have fought the bull of heaven, never have written your name on history. The city would not now be holding its breath, praying for Enkidu. Gilgamesh would not be kneeling now in the temple of the gods, weeping salt tears. Don't you see? Without Hunter and Hattie, you would never have met Gilgamesh. Now Gilgamesh will be the wild man. He will mourn you like a wolf baying at the moon and wander the world looking for comfort. Would you really choose to have lived without such a friend? Enkidu's fist closed around the empty air containing the sunbeam. I call them back, every last curse. Be my witness, Shamash, I call them back. So calling back or taking back these curses, we're looking at question 2. Never have met Gilgamesh? Hunter, may your traps be full every morning. May your arrows never miss their mark. Never have met Gilgamesh? Hattie, little Hattie, let men 12 leagues away see you and swoon. Let kings stop their chariots to propose marriage. Let the gods lean out of heaven to whistle at you. Never have met Gilgamesh? That would have been never to have lived at all. We came alive together, he and I. We made sense of it all. We made sense. Enkidu let his hand fall. Fever made the room throb and crinkle like the walls of a bread oven, and his tears were scalding hot. And yet he was easier in his mind. Gilgamesh came bounding back from the temple, hopeful, full of optimism. Now Enkidu would get better. It took only one glance to know he was mistaken. His friend's eyes were shut. Gilgamesh sank his fingers into his friend's hair and shook him. Wake up! I thought you were. So this is where we're supposed to infer, fifth graders. Remember, inferring is when the author doesn't tell us, but we have to imagine what the answer might be based on clues. So Gilgamesh is shaking him, saying, wake up! I thought you were. What? You infer for question 3. You thought he was what? Then Gilgamesh cradled his friend in his arms, and their tears soaked indistinguishable into the crumpled pillow. For 7 days, Gilgamesh struggled like a man swimming mid-ocean, trying to keep a friend afloat. Below them, in the depths, cruised death. First it would swallow Enkidu, and then in the blinking of an eye, Gilgamesh. Life was nothing but treading water until the sharks came along. It's shameful for a man to die like this, said Enkidu. Ishtar hasn't just killed me, she has managed to shame me too. Listen, why is everywhere so quiet? Gilgamesh eased his arm from under Enkidu and stood up. Stiffly, he went to the window with its broad sill and stepped outside, high above the silent city. His voice carried loud over the early morning city. Quiet! It's not quiet, friend. Can't you hear the people of Uruk weeping for Enkidu? Can't you hear them? The girls who brought you food, the bathhouse girls who rubbed oil into your back, the shepherds, all sobbing like children. Listen! And the friends you made, so many friends. And Hattie, little Hattie, he raised his voice still higher. You animals in the wilderness, you knew him in his wild days, and you are weeping for him, aren't you? You trees in the cedar forest, you're weeping for him, aren't you? Every place we ever went, every blade of grass we trod underfoot, every river we ever drank from, all the mountains and all the valleys, they're weeping for you. Everyone is mourning Enkidu. Listen, can't you hear? Why can't you hear? He's shouting right now at Enkidu, saying, why can't you hear? Can't you hear? Why? So maybe we're thinking about a prediction to the answer to that question. Maybe thinking about the chapter title, maybe thinking about this shout that he's yelling at Enkidu. He went back to the man on the bed, still shouting his lament. But Enkidu's eyes remained shut. Gilgamesh laid a hand on the wild man's heart, but he knew he would feel no beat. How many of you had that prediction? Maybe? And me, Kidu, and me, I'm weeping. I'm weeping for you, Enkidu. Wake up now. Wake up and see how the world prizes you. Don't sleep your life away. Wake up now. Don't get lost in the dark. So we got to be clear, Gilgamesh is continuing in his grief to ask Enkidu to wake up, but there is evidence in that paragraph that Enkidu has died. What is that evidence? Hopefully you're thinking that when Gilgamesh goes to feel Enkidu's heart, right, he says that he knew he would feel no beat, meaning Enkidu's heart is not beating anymore. Gilgamesh covered his friend over with a sheet of silk, carefully, precisely, meticulously. Then he let loose the madness which he had kept at bay so long. He smashed everything precious, everything beautiful, ripping down hangings, hurling ornaments out of the window. He tore out his hair and pulled his clothes in shreds, twisting his knuckles white amid their rich fabrics. Then, when the rage was past, he sat down again by his friend, panting, one hand on the silk. Wake up now. Please wake up. The whole household gathered outside the door, whispering anxiously, calling out, offering to carry the body away for burial. But Gilgamesh would not let them in. He fixed his eyes on his friend's shrouded face, and he willed the silk to stir. So he's looking at the part that's covering his friend's face, and he's willing it to stir. What would it mean if the silk stirred, which is like moving? What would it mean if the silk by Enkidu's face moved? Yeah, it would mean he was breathing. So Gilgamesh is really hoping that he'll start breathing. All that day he sat with the body, all of the next day too. He did not try to hold back his tears. For 7 days and 7 nights he watched them make their splashy patterns on the tiles at his feet. Then on the 8th day, he stopped crying. Realization fell on him like a ton of sand. No amount of crying was going to bring Enkidu back. His death went on forever. He got up and opened the door. The smell of decay in the bedroom was choking. Gilgamesh went outside into the sterile sunlight. The little golden statue of Enkidu, which he had commissioned as a bride to the gods, stood on a table outside the temple of Shamash. Beside it, Gilgamesh set a red carnelian bowl filled with honey, and a bowl of lapis lazuli filled with butter, offerings to the gods. After all, they were not really to blame, he mused, as flies droned in circles over the honey, and the butter changed from pale gold to a clear, translucent liquor. Mortal men are bound by the rules of nature. From the moment of birth, they are heading towards their death. He would not curse Shamash or Anu or Enlil or Nergal or even Ishtar for taking his friend away from him. It was unbearable, and yet it had to be borne. That was the paradox. Unbearable, and yet it had to be borne. Just so long as they did not expect him, too, to die. So 5th graders, if you read the chapter with me, most of the answers you've seen evidence of in the text. But remember, for question 6, and our objective for today, we're interpreting a symbol. And the symbol we're interpreting actually happened much earlier in the book. It says on page 26, so it's about 20 pages ago. This is when he and Enkidu are wandering in the forest, and Gilgamesh wakes up to this dream that there was a bull charging at Enkidu, and Gilgamesh couldn't stop the bull. And so my question for 6 is, what is that symbolic of? What is that a symbol of? It's not referring to the bull of heaven, so your answer should not be the bull of heaven. Okay, what is it a symbol of? Think about the end of the chapter, okay, and what you'd say about that. Looking forward to reading through your answers, 5th graders. If you have questions, let me know, but good luck. You're going to go ahead and answer the questions attached to this assignment.